Hello everyone and welcome on back to the channel. We have, oh my god, my fucking now that my retainers are out of my mouth, I'm so excited to be talking to you all about the new spear skills that have come to every single profession in Guild Wars 2. I've spent the greater half of the day playing every single profession, and this is going to be my genuine first impression in the beta, of course, so these are not finalized, and with anything in gaming development, things are subject to change even after they officially go live. So take this with a pinch of salt and continue to provide your feedback to the developers in kind and as constructive as possible. So let us begin with Warrior. Warrior Spears, when I first saw the trailer, was, well, my overall takeaway was, well, that seems pretty simple. And I gotta say that I was pretty much right. The Warrior Spears are a very straightforward weapon kit, and it's solid. The foundation of the spear is very solid. However, I could see it benefiting a little bit more if that foundation was built up. And I find that for the spear, they could definitely benefit from adding things like self-might generation, hell, even area of effect AoE might generation, if not maybe like boon generation, maybe some more vulnerability application on enemies, just because the actual tooltips of these skills really just revolve around damage and area of effect sizes. There are no additional effects such as boons, debuffs, or conditions tied to this weapon, and I love the simplicity of that. However, I think adding one or two here or there could just benefit this kit as a whole. Now, when it comes to the Warrior, this is a ranged weapon. However, the range is more so middle ranged. It's only 900 units. And when you're looking at the Warrior's list of abilities and weapons that they can wield, they don't really have a solid long-ranged power weapon. So for the spear, I thought it would be a really nice niche to fill if it in fact shone at that 1200 range threshold. But for what it is, I think it's very straightforward and it's overall fun to play. Now let's talk about Guardian. Now Guardian is my absolute favorite, as it is ArenaNet's, as we all know. When I first was playing with the spear, really gravitated towards the actual flow of the abilities, the way that they weave into each other, the way that mobility is utilized, and how the weapon's effect, known as Luminance, cycles between all of your spell casts, so you have that momentum going. And while I really enjoy the Luminance mechanic, I feel like they could have pushed it a bit further. Instead of just like increasing the amount of damage that something does or increasing the amount of healing that a spell will deal, it would have been nice if it actually changed the way that spell was presented and or changed how you positioned it in some manner. I think they succeeded on the fourth ability because when you have the Luminance effect, it will shoot out more spears. So you're getting more benefit in an area, striking more targets. But for all the other abilities, it doesn't go that far. One thing I would like to see for this weapon is for them to lean a bit more into that support playstyle, which this weapon was advertised as. However, the scaling isn't that great, and the tools provided, I feel, are missing something. So I would love to see the Luminance maybe implement healing paths when you're using your second ability, which rushes you to a direction, or implementing things like barrier, or, you know, a healing over time effect that isn't regen, something to spice it up a little bit. So while I really loved the Guardian Spear, and I think it fits a fun niche, I think the tuning is a little bit off, and I wouldn't mind seeing the Luminance mechanic leaned into a little bit more, just to incentivize players appropriately and wisely rotating their skills. Now let's talk about the Revenant. The Revenant is the final heavy armor that we're going to be talking about, and I'm going to be very honest, this weapon was so slow, and I don't know why it was so slow. All of the cast times were around 1 second if you include the aftercast. The final fifth ability is 1.25 seconds, and that's really your bread and butter skill. It's the skill you want to be using. It's a long cast time, and its area of effect was really slow, or very small. So on top of the slowness and the small radius effect of the skills, it made it very tricky to actually land hits. And that was my most jarring impression when playing with the Revenant Spear. It was slow, and it was a little clumsy, but I can definitely see a future for this weapon. Once again, the foundation, what is presented to us in the beta, I think is solid. I just think that they have to shave down those cast times by like a bit. You know, bring it down to a half a second, 3/4 of a second for the other longer cast time spells on the kit, and it should flow a bit more smooth. And on top of my issue with the speed of the weapon, I think that this playstyle is more so centered around condition damage. However, it's only one damaging condition in the form of Torment. And when you're talking about competitive elements, and hell, even PvE, there are certain abilities which will cleanse those conditions. So I would love to see maybe bleeding or poison added to this weapon, even confusion, just a little something extra. And my final critique would be to the actual 5th ability. The 5th ability provides you with a buff, and it's supposed to be your core skill on the weapon kit, which you're bringing most of your attention to. I think that is a little low in duration. It's only 8 seconds. I think that could be brought up to 10 seconds because this ability does not refresh the other stacks that you have. It will numerically drop off after 8 seconds. Duration, as it is right now, is too low, especially when you're, considering that the weapons are very slow to cast. So you're wasting time in between those casts, and it doesn't feel great. But I really enjoyed the Revenant thematically, visually, and maybe a bit more strike damage so I can play it as Vindicator and really sink into my Dragoon fantasy. Next, let's move on to the medium armors, and we're going to be talking about Engineer. Engineer Spear, a surprise hit. I will not pull any wool over your eyes. I really enjoyed the Engineer Spear. It had a lot of themes with electricity and static and shocking, which is very reminiscent of the Scrapper and maybe even a bit of Hollowsmith. And I really enjoyed those forms of the Engineer. So having this new weapon kind of mimic that, I really loved in terms of visuals. And then when it comes to the gameplay of it, I thought it was doing good damage, it was fun, it was fast, you had good mobility, you had a really strong crowd control effect in the form of the 4th ability, and it was very pleasant. It was a very fun time, which I think is the main goal with any new content, and particularly with a new weapon, is that fun aspect. My only main criticism of this weapon is that its focus skill, the 2nd ability applies a debuff to a target that lasts 10 seconds, which further enhances all of your other spear attacks. However, it does not actually pop up with any solid indicator as to how much more time that debuff is going to be rolling on that particular target. It is only able to be understood based off of that visual above your target's head. And depending on how tall or small your target is, it can be very difficult to see. So I wouldn't mind if there was perhaps a way for the player character themselves just to have that pop up as a unique debuff that they can track in some manner. Next, let's talk about the Ranger. Ranger feels like a very complete kit. It is very well thought out, and much like the Engineer, I had a great time playing it. Was I personally wowed in any way? Not necessarily. Graphically, it is perfectly good. It is kind of to be expected with Ranger, channeling spirits and the nature magics, so I loved that. And in terms of the way that the gameplay flows between all of the buttons, I really enjoyed it. And especially because there is so much emphasis on stealth with this weapon, it adds a new flavor to the class. It adds something new to be interested in where you might not have been interested in it before. So I do commend the attention to stealth with the Ranger Spear. And on top of that, I thought the flexibility between the melee attacks and the ranged attacks to be one of the most alluring factors on this weapon. I can just imagine in PvP, you're striking your enemy in melee range and they happen to port and dash away, and most times you'd be like, damn it, I have to catch them. But nay, when you are on the Ranger Spear, you can immediately start using your ranged abilities, the auto attack and the third ability, and maybe even throw in your fifth ability, because that also is technically a ranged attack, to catch them and to chase them down and to continue that damage. So loved Ranger. Very solid weapon. Finally, for the medium armors, let's talk about Thief. Guys, I'm gonna keep saying it, but I think they just really put their all into these weapons, because Thief, once again, a stealth hit. I found it was so much fun to play. Honestly, one of my favorites out of the 9 professions. This weapon puts the Thief in a very different mindset than the other weapons. With Spear, you're so much more focused on comboing your abilities together in a way that you have never been focused on before. I really enjoyed the emphasis on making a choice with this weapon. You can choose to go a full route of combos with the 2-2-2. You can choose to mix it up, do 2-3-2, do 3-2-3, 3-3-3. You can then also weave in your fourth ability, which acts as a you get a benefit if you use a finisher before it, and then it also acts as an initial lead attack to then combo into your 2 and 3 abilities. There is so much comboing going on with this weapon kit, and I really applaud Thief, because most of the times when you're playing Thief, you just spam whichever is your strongest weapon ability. But they found a very masterful way to draw more attention to planning out your attacks and comboing. So Thief knocked it out of the park for me. One thing I noticed is that your skills will not queue up themselves. So you have to be very accurate in knowing when your animation is done, because it will not queue up the next button that you've pressed. It didn't seem like that was working with Thief. It felt a little clunky in that area. I'm not sure if that's because of the combo system, but if they're able to implement that in some way to make it a bit smoother, that would be fantastic. So Thief was great. Now let's talk about the light armors, the magical classes, and some of my most cherished. On top of Guardian, of course. Let's start with Necromancer. Well, it's kind of funny because I've been talking in such a positive light about all these weapons, and I just talked about light armors being some cherished classes. But Necromancer, if I'm going to be honest with all of you here today, I was not blown away as much by the Necromancer Spear. It just felt like a very modern version of Greatsword, but I say modern because it didn't even feel new. It felt like a repetition of a lot of themes that we've already been seeing on Necromancer. And while it completely works, it's left me wanting more. It's left me wondering if there are any other creative juices going on behind the scenes when they're approaching Necromancer. And I know there is. There's a whole bunch of ideas in terms of death magic, minion mastery, dark magic spellcasting, soul magic, and not just like green chilling and, you know, providing spell effects that look to be condition based, and then you've come to find out that they're all power based. And I think that's one element that would have differentiated this weapon set from things like Greatsword or Sword or even Dagger, is if this two-handed melee weapon was condition damage, because Necromancer currently does not have a condition damage melee two-handed option. So it would have been more interesting if it emphasized things like poison and bleed and torment, but particularly poison, because death magic is a Necromancer specialization line, and it enhances poison, but no one really seems to take that. There's not a lot of intention to it, and it would have been a nice place for them to go down to offer something new. I also think the soul shards seem too similar to what we've received in other Necromancer updates, like with Life Leech. There's a lot of Life Leech and Lifesteal. It just doesn't feel new anymore. It doesn't feel groundbreaking. It doesn't feel innovative, which all of these other professions really have pushed what their classes can do and have been bringing up minor elements of their profession to give them a breath of fresh air. And Necromancer did not do that whatsoever. And yeah, it works, it does damage, but it's it's lackluster, in my opinion, in terms of providing something new to players. So while that is unfortunate for Necromancers in terms of my initial impression, let's move on to some better things. We have Mesmer. I found Mesmer to be a very beautiful weapon, both in terms of style and in terms of gameplay. First and foremost, it was just fun. It was really fun. And the weapon's buff ability is known as Clarity, and it was very forgiving in its duration. It was so much more forgiving than the other professions, where other profession buffs would only last 5, maybe 8 seconds. No, Clarity lasted like 15 seconds. So they really allowed you to think about the next skill you would utilize. And I love that. I don't mind when self buffs last a longer duration so the player cannot, or so the player can just make a more, calm and collected choice and not feel like they have to spam a bunch of abilities. So I really want to give props to Mesmer's Spear for that. And while I love the duration of Clarity, I found that much like Guardian's Illuminance, the Clarity effect didn't really push the bounds as much as I would have liked it to. It would just increase the damage, or give a daze to an ability, or give you a greater heal, or cleanse a condition. So it wasn't as exciting when it could have been. But I do want to shout out the one skill that made it exciting, and that is the Phantasm on the Spear, the Phantasmal Lancer. When you have Clarity, or when you don't have Clarity, you'll just summon one, and it will launch right after you leap. But if you have Clarity on yourself from using the second ability, it will instead summon 2 Phantasms to shoot off in an X formation, and it's really cool. It changes the way that you look at that ability. It offers a new feeling. It offers a new taste to the player that I loved. So Mesmer, also really solid. Mesmer's, I hope you're happy because it was really fun. It was also fun to play on Mirage. And now we have come to the moment that we've all been waiting for. We're going to talk about Elementalist. Elementalist, easily one of my favorite weapons to be added in years. It finally offers and hits on class fantasy in a way I have not felt since Heart of Thorns. I'm going to be straight up with you guys. Elementalist Spear provides that spellcastery vibe that I have been searching for in Elementalist for a long, long time. In the past few years, the new weapons that have come to this magic class have all been melee weapons where you're just hitting people with a sword and a trail of fire will follow, or you're hitting them with a hammer and it's coated in an ice effect. So we've been missing that magic caster motif and fantasy, and Spear delivers upon it with such fury and with such glamour and pizzazz, and I love it. I really love it. Visually, it hits every single nail on the head, and even when it comes to the mechanics of the actual kit, it flows very well. I don't feel like I am forcing myself to cycle through a bunch of attunements at breakneck speed to get use out of the kit and out of the weapon. So I loved that. However, when it comes to the duration of buffs, I found the 5th ability, those spell circles, they are too short of a duration. When you activate that, then you go into the spamming mode. And I don't love that. I really was cherishing this more methodical strategizing with your abilities. And then when you incorporate that 5th ability, all that goes out the window and you just start spamming because it only lasts 5 seconds. And the cast times, depending on your abilities that you have, can be a little bit of a pain point. So I think if the 5th ability in its duration lasted 6 seconds, just something, a little extra leniency. I would love if it lasted 7 seconds though, not gonna lie. I think 7 would be a good sweet spot. I know it's an odd number. It's not an even 6 and 8 look and feel great, but 7, honestly, I would be down for that. Now, on top of the duration increase that I would like to see, I will 100% agree that the Spear weapon needs to provide more damage. It's falling into the trap that Staff is, where a long-ranged weapon with a lot of cast times to it is not fulfilling, and it's not hitting on that level of impact that it needs to. Numbers will always change, even beyond this video and in the years to come. But I would love to see them really push some of those numbers, because when you're releasing a new product like these spears, they all better be hitting good. They all better feel a little overtuned. Not wildly overpowered, but tune them to a way where you even as like a newer player, feel like you're doing a good amount of damage to it. And then in the months following, 3 to 6 months following the release, you can start tuning things back a little bit, making some subtle hot fixes for those extreme outliers. But yeah, I would love to see all of these spears be buffed in certain ways. Though I feel like Engineer and Thief might be okay. They might be okay. They're really, really solid. So those were my general thoughts when it comes to the spear weapon in Guild Wars 2 Janthir Wilds. Not a single spear flopped. Not a single one of them failed. They all worked. They all played very well. It really came down to the minutia of balancing, personal taste, personal desire and expectation. But if I even remove that, I have to admit that they delivered really, really strong weapons, really strong spell effects, really strong animations, and I gotta give it up to them. And if you have not yet, you can pre-order Guild Wars 2 Janthir Wilds down below in the description, because I have a link down below and it greatly helps me out. Thank you so much. And also, while you are down there, the other expansions are currently, at the time of filming this video, they are 75% off on the summer sale. So feel free to get any of the expansions you might have missed. They are all worth it for the price point. Absolutely 5,000%. So if you'd like to purchase, head down below. And if you'd like to support me on Patreon, get early access to videos and some exclusive videos, you can head on over there. I also stream on Twitch on the weekends, and I also post a bunch of tweets over on Twitter. So comment, like, and subscribe. Actually, definitely comment. I would love to hear your thoughts about the Spear Beta if you've played. Which are your favorites? Which ones are you not fond of? And where do you think they went right? Where do you think they went wrong? And I will see you all in the next video. Take care, everyone. Mwah.